Welcome to VLGA Connect. My name is Catherine Arndt and I'm the Chief of the VLGA Connect studio. I hope you enjoy today's Connect episode brought to you by the VLGA, the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Welcome one and all to the governance update from VLGA Connect with our thanks to Hunt and Hunt Lawyers, our terrific sponsors, and I'm pleased to say hello, good morning as we record this on a Friday morning to Stephen Cooper.
Oh, hi, Chris. Now, I'm sorry I don't have time for pleasantries. I think,
Really?
No, not today. There's a very important question. Everyone in Melbourne who's on Twitter is wondering, Chris, are you PR guy?
Oh, damn. No, I'm not. Are you PR guy, Stephen Cooper?
No, I'm not. I am definitely not PR guy. I'm thinking of joining the throng and posting to Twitter to that effect. Although your panellist from the other week, Leo Puglisi of Six News, suggested that Troy McClure is PR guy.
Maybe that's a clever diversionary tactic. Maybe Leo Puglisi is PR guy.
Maybe PR guy was a 13-year-old at that stage. It's always possible.
Why are we talking about this? He says, knowing the answer, but...
Look, some people, in fact, just quickly, because some people may not know who PR Guy is. And PR Guy is a Twitter account that particularly during lockdown was very supportive of the COVID-related measures, supportive of the Andrews government. And there was some speculation that, in fact, it may be an account from an insider. PR Guy managed to offend and upset Avi Yamini, who is a quite well-known commentator with a less progressive view and a rather colourful background, it's fair to say. Avi Yamini has gone off to the Supreme Court and got an order from Twitter to release the identity of PR Guy. So it raises a whole lot of issues, I suppose, Chris, around anonymity on social media.
Yes, and I did see some commentary on this, and it will be, people are waiting to see how savvy PR Guy actually is in terms of identity protection, because it could be a dead end, or it could actually open up a whole new path of exposure for folks.
I think that's right, and that part will be interesting. There is the whole theatre. I think the part for local government, of course, though, Chris, is that in terms of our commentary and commentary more generally around use of social media and trolls, that it opens up a whole lot of ethical issues around people hiding behind anonymity when they're posting to social media. And I was really interested in some commentary that said that anonymity is actually important at times in terms of releasing, information on corruption and malpractice.
Yeah. So for the sake of clarity, do you think we can agree that neither you nor I are PR Guy and people should look elsewhere?
I think so. Chris, I'm happy to take your word for it.
And are you, Steve?
Thank you.
We've got so much news to talk about. Sorry, Mike, I think I just whacked Mike in the head. So much news to talk about this week, but I do want to do a slight mea culpa. I'm not saying addendum and erratum, as you would, Stephen. Last week on our running sheet, we had this excellent piece of work that Rhys Thomas at Yarra has done on remote meetings and review of governance rules, and for some reason I completely skipped over it until after we'd finished editing the show, and I thought, that was going to be one of our main topics of discussion, so that's my fault, and I know, Steve, you're looking forward to talking about this.
I'll take some responsibility too, Chris, because in our really detailed preamble, we did talk about it. In fact, I was talking with a person yesterday who knows more than a little bit about governance, who asked me if I'd seen it, and I had to relay that story that, in fact, no, we meant to talk about it last week, but we are this week. And the link's on the show notes, Chris, but it was a terrific 4-pager from Rhys, really unpacking a lot of the issues around remote and hybrid meetings. And the thing that my friend and I both talked about yesterday was that it kind of lured you into a sense of complacency that were reading, and then, I hadn't thought of that.
Exactly. That was my reaction as well.
So without being too much of a spoiler, Chris, that notion that Rhys identified that I was really struck by was the one that, historically when people are absent because of illness or a break because of attendance meetings, that's really been blown out of the water because someone might be unwell. Well, do we expect them to come to a remote meeting because they can? A whole lot of issues there.
I think the takeaway for me, for those who don't understand what we're talking about, is that the new regulations come into effect in September. And as Reece points out, most governance rules, if any, do not provide a process for requesting and approval of attendance at council meetings and meetings of delegated committees by electronic means of communication. One of the ones that jumped out to me is, what do you do if someone turns up at a meeting under those circumstances but hasn't sought permission, if that's what the rules require?
Absolutely. And look, in some ways, Chris, I'm not sure I mind, but it would be good to have them in the rules.
Yes.
Either way.
Yeah. So check that out. We will put the link in the show notes. As you say, it is a 4-page piece which really gets to the heart of the matter, and I reckon it's probably been digested pretty seriously by governance professionals already.
I think it has been around that circuit, Chris. Good on them.
All right, well done to Reece. Now, talking about legislation, Steve, we had a surprise drop of new legislation this week from the local government minister in relation to financial hardship. When I say surprise, I think we knew that the government was working on something in response to the Ombudsman's report, which came out a bit over a year ago now. Some of the reaction to this has been interesting, though.
Yeah, I would think, Chris, that the consultation later, post the Ombudsman's report and some work by the ESC, would sit in the IAP2 framework as inform. Certainly, the VLGA had a meeting with Local Government Victoria to let us know what was coming. I think the other thing too, Chris, is that given my limited sample, but post the Ombudsman's report, I know a number of councils have looked at their hardship policies. And again, the people I've spoken to this week have said they haven't been surprised by the legislation or its content, because really what it does is bed down what they've now put in their policies anyway.
I'm happy to declare that Whittlesea was one of those councils that did a review last year and updated the policy. I think perhaps the councils that have done that are probably not the ones that people are concerned about, Steve. The response, though, to this is what caught my eye. The MAV put out a statement yesterday using such language as a kick in the guts for hardworking councils, and basically saying it wants the state government to work with the sector more respectfully. I'm just not sure what they expect that approach to deliver, and time will tell.
It was a bit of an eyebrow raising. It certainly was a media release that got attention, Chris.
Yes, it sure has. Yeah.
And I would say, this is a topic that the VLGA has been talking with government as well, on the fact that there is a Victorian state local government agreement that talks to the importance of consultation. Let's just remember that that's a really important topic, and we'll do it.
Yeah.
Do that consultation respectfully.
Indeed. My concern is we have more of this sort of tone as we get closer to a state election.
Well, we know that elections do bring out tone, Chris, don't they?
Yes, they do. All right, perhaps enough said on that one. I know you want to talk about the upcoming Women Leading Locally seminars. These are, of course, these terrific efforts to bring more women, particularly into local government at upcoming elections.
State government program awarded to the Institute of Community Directors, Chris, and I think that group is getting towards the end of its information sessions across the state. And I did note a tweet from Ruth McGowan during the week that said that Local Government Victoria have advised that if the program is undersubscribed, applicants from non-target councils, because it identified 30 target councils, will also be considered, especially from diverse backgrounds. There is another, inverted commas, other, close inverted commas, option on the application form. So commend that program to women across the state who are considering standing for council, Chris.
Absolutely, and it's obviously up and running, because I've seen a few tweets and LinkedIn posts from the likes of Ruth and others. I think they're in Geelong this week, and we'll come back to Geelong shortly because there's a bit of news coming out of the second biggest city in Victoria this week.
There sure is, Chris. And just on the notion of training and awareness for prospective candidates and the community, certainly that was a topic that's been identified in the Insights paper in regard to the local government culture project. I think there's been a bit of a trend emerging of people saying it's not just potential women candidates who need some training. Maybe some of the blokes do too, which is not just playing catch up and me too, but in the notion of making sure that candidates are as aware and equipped as possible before they make that decision.
It's a recurring topic, isn't it? And you've just reminded me of the stuff that's come out of Western Australia this week, which is on our list to talk about a little bit later on, and just generally lots of conversations happening about culture. I think a lot of people believe, as I do, that if you get better and more diverse representation, you might start to address some of those cultural issues, but there's some pretty entrenched stuff going on which just continues to raise eyebrows and cause despair, quite frankly.
So maybe training, Chris, because I suspect oftentimes, I mean, sometimes it's willful, a sort of burn down the house mentality, but sometimes it's just people not being aware of the implications of their actions on the culture of the organisation, which is one of the reasons why inclusion is such an important topic.
Let's start working through these news articles, Steve, because as I said at the top of the show, there's lots to talk about. A call from the chief of IBAC for some reform to stop this build-up of cases that are sitting in the courts.
Well, we've been wondering, Chris, about what is in the Operation Sandon report in regard to Casey City Council, and what's emerged is that we now know one thing for sure, and that is that John Woodman, the developer's name, has been mentioned 1,450 times in that report. Interesting stat, but we also know that the matter raised by Mr. Woodman in the Supreme Court relates to really that principle of natural justice where, and we know it's a pretty common practice that any sort of report of this nature, a draft goes to the subjects for them to comment on prior to the final report being released. So we know that Mr. Woodman's in court. We know that Commissioner Redlich has said that he's related to, or he has communicated to the state government and opposition, seeking amendment to the IBAC Act to, I guess, water down the protections available to people who are mentioned in those reports, because there's a public interest in, the release of the report, not this sort of delay and disruption. And my only comment would be that Commissioner Redlich is a former judge of the Supreme Court of Appeal. So, I would tend to take anything he says with a bit of gravitas.
Yeah, I'm sure he knows his stuff. And meanwhile, this just drags on. And I think the sector is fully expecting some pretty broad-ranging recommendations, shall we say, to come out of this, and is waiting to see. But like everyone else, we just have to sit back and ponder for now.
We do. And, and no one's saying there shouldn't be an element of natural justice and an opportunity to comment, but maybe there's a point at which we say enough
is enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Righto, Steve. We've had two mayors step down in Victoria this week for slightly different reasons. One has stepped down in order to run for state parliament. Another has stepped down after running unsuccessfully for federal parliament. So let's deal with the first one. Kim O'Keefe at Greater Shepparton in her fourth term as mayor stood down on Monday night. Look, I knew she was going to be stepping down. We had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and her intention to run as a Nationals candidate for the state parliament was announced a few weeks back now. I thought she might wait till after the ALGWA conference, which was in Shepparton last weekend, and that's exactly what happened. So on Monday.
You're ahead of your time, Chris. Well done, you. And you and I have pondered previously about what's the right time for a prospective state or federal candidate who is a councillor to stand down. And I guess my point is I never mind if they do early, because at what point when they speak in the chamber are they being a candidate rather than a councillor? And I think public trust must be maintained. There's a point where it's too early, but yeah, I think well done to Kim O'Keefe for standing aside, and congratulations to Councillor Shane Sarley, who's been elected as Mayor of the City of Greater Shepparton.
Just on that point you make about when is the point when it's too early? So this is 5 months that Kim stood down as mayor and is also going to be taking a leave of absence as of today, I believe. So 5 months to not be in the role of councillor effectively, and I understand the reasons why, and I'm not saying it's not the right thing to do, it clearly is. But when is too early? What is the period of time that it's acceptable in these circumstances for someone to not be fulfilling the role they've been elected to?
Chris, I think it goes also to people's view of their local councillor, that if a community thinks that their local councillor is the portal for public complaints, for example, then they'll feel quite disenfranchised more than if they see that the councillor has a strategic role. So case by case basis, I suppose.
I still would like an answer to the question. I don't think you've got it. When is too early? What would be considered? Because I don't think the Act gives any guidance on this, does it?
No, not at all, Chris. So it's which shade of grey do we adopt?
Yeah, of course, all for transparency. And if someone is intending to run and they've made it for another level and they've made those arrangements behind the scenes, etc., as you say, you can't change your hat to suit the circumstances once that's out there.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, too true.
Now, as you mentioned, Shane Sarley has been elected as Mayor of Greater Shepparton. That will be for the remainder of the term up until whenever the next election's due, around November, early December. The Deputy Mayor remains Councillor Anthony Brophy, a first-term councillor there. Now, the other Mayor that has stepped down this week is Stephanie Asher at Greater Geelong. So she's announced she's stepping down. I think it takes effect next Wednesday, and there's a meeting of council scheduled for next Friday, the 17th, to elect the new mayor. Now, in Geelong, the mayor's elected for a 2-year term. Trent Sullivan was elected as deputy mayor for 2 years and has been acting mayor since January, while Stephanie ran as a Liberal candidate unsuccessfully, as it turns out, in the federal seat. And Steve, you might have seen some of the conjecture that coming back to the mayoral role, having been an unsuccessful Liberal candidate, the propensity or the capacity to work with a federal Labor government raised concerns about an increased politicisation of that role. I don't know what's happened behind the scenes, but Stephanie's made a comment or two this week to say that, for the good of the council, she is stepping down, but says she's never let that political role and that community representative role get put her in a place of conflict.
It's an interesting one, Chris, because absolutely essential, and as an officer, for councils to be able to work with whichever side of government happens to be in power at the time. And there is a community interest in, and you can read that Stephanie's saying just that, in being able to work across the aisle, because if a government that it's not your personal favour happens to be in power, you still need to be working with them to, achieve grants and projects on behalf of your council.
All right, so all the best to Stephanie, and we'll probably not next week, but the week after, be able to talk about who the new Mayor of Greater Geelong is, because that meeting's on Friday evening, I think, the 17th.
Right, and just on Geelong, Chris, then we had a letter during the week, sort of a quite extraordinary letter, signed by 5 local Labor MPs regarding Geelong Council.
Extraordinary is the word for it, Steve. This is front page news on today's Geelong Advertiser, that the City of Greater Geelong has received a letter signed by Lisa Neville, Gail Tierney, John Aaron, Christine Cousins and Darren Cheeseman, basically warning about a growing concern and lack of confidence, it's quoted as saying, in the city's ability to deliver key state-funded projects. And what these MPs are saying is that the state government is going to prioritise major projects that don't rely on the city's involvement, and are also threatening to freeze Greater Geelong out of planning for the 2026 Commonwealth Games. This is pretty serious stuff.
It's quite extraordinary, Chris. And we know that for councils, delivery of a capital works program is at the best of times problematic, because all sorts of things can happen. And so it typically is one of the major indicators for a CEO. The council likes to know that its capital projects are delivered. Without knowing the circumstances in Greater Geelong, though, town planning obligations, availability of staff, supply chains, there's a whole lot of issues going on at the moment that that, would impact the delivery of those projects, one would have thought.
Absolutely. And again, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes there too, but I know every council is struggling to deliver projects, to get tenders, to keep to budget. The supply chain issues are really starting to bite. The lack of workers in key roles is causing problems. I'm sure that's an element in Geelong as it is for everywhere else. But this letter points out 6 examples apparently of projects that are receiving significant government investment that the MPs are claiming have been delayed by mishandling or inaction by the City of Greater Geelong. It could be a politically motivated move. It's certainly achieved front page of the Geelong Advertiser today, so maybe that's what they're looking for.
I can just imagine some FOIs going on though, Chris, because you'd have to think that there would be communication between the council and the various funding agencies regarding acquittal of the various grants for which those projects are subject.
Steve, can we also assume that a letter like this signed by 5 MPs has the imprimatur, or at least the tacit approval of the Premier's office, the Department of Premier and Cabinet? You wouldn't think 5 MPs would do this without DPC knowing, would you?
One of 2 things has happened, Chris. Either DPC know or they have, quote, gone rogue.
Right. And we may never know, but...
No, I suspect that is the bit that's true. We may never know.
Yes. All right, so check out today's Geelong Advertiser if you want to see more about that. I suspect that's not the last we'll hear of it, though. Some other news this week at the senior executive level. So congratulations to Brett Davis, who has been appointed as the CEO down at Moyne Shire, taking over from Bill Millard, who stepped down a few weeks or a couple of months ago now. So Brett has been acting in the role since that time and has now been confirmed as the CEO. So well done to him.
And they seem to like appointing candidates with a town planning background to the CEO role at Moyne. And yeah, congratulations to Brett. And yeah, good luck to all.
Indeed. Now, we mentioned last week that the Darebin Council was having a special meeting to appoint an interim CEO. We indulged in a little bit of speculation, which ended up being quite wide of the mark, or I did, because Rachel Olivia, the acting, is now confirmed as the interim, and well done to her.
And another town planner. And yeah, so interim CEO now, sort of for such time as the council will take to appoint a permanent CEO. And I think I said last time, congratulations to Rachel. She's doing a good job.
And we've got some CEO news. I know this caught your eye. I've talked about this a couple of times now on the Roundup in the International Spotlight segment, Steve. Some news out of Texas, a rather extraordinary story about the contract of the city manager there that's been playing out for some years now.
Well, only, Chris, that you decided to name the show last week, The Morning After the Night Before, which is a John Williamson song from the Old Man Emu album, as I recall. But I just thought you would want to go, in the words of Marty Robbins, out to the West Texas town of El Paso.
Out in the West Texas town of El Paso, I fell in love with a Mexican girl, one of my all-time favourite songs.
There you go. Now, let's just move along, though, Chris, and talk about the city manager contract, because I think the mayor, in the words of the song, said, I caught a good one. It looked like a good one.
You are. It looked like it could run, actually.
Oh,
it was the line, but I won't.
I'll muck that up.
I won't hold that against you. I used to be able to recite every single word of that song, but that's I don't think I could do it now. That's an aside. So Tommy Gonzalez is his name. His contract was first awarded in 2014. We've had this interesting situation over the last few weeks where the council has renewed the contract early for a 5-year term. It's not due up till 2024, but it will now go out to 2029. The mayor vetoed it. The council then came back and overrode the veto by re-awarding the contract extension. And the mayor vetoed it again. And the council has now again overridden the veto, and the mayor cannot override for a third time. Extraordinary.
Oh, and there's a whole backstory, Chris, where, and certainly a piece that I saw in the El Paso Matters newspaper, which talks to the way that Mr. Gonzalez's salary package has escalated dramatically over time, compounded at about 7% a year, which is pretty extraordinary when you run that over about 12 years.
Yes.
And also more recently, I think Mr. Gonzalez might have made noises about going elsewhere, and the council has responded accordingly.
69% in 8 years. In fact, the pay has increased. He started in 2014 on 238,000. It's now at 404,000, and it potentially could go up to 450,000 under the terms of the new contract. He's a former lieutenant colonel in the army. I reckon he probably rules with an iron fist.
I suspect so, Chris, and he is pretty good at the salary negotiation caper.
Absolutely. Actually, have a look at that article. We'll put the link in the show notes for all of the terms and conditions and the bonuses and additional things that go with that contract. It's pretty extraordinary. Steve, it might be worth just showing a little bit of the exchange from El Paso Council. This stuff is going on all around the world, obviously. We know about Handforth in England. We know about WA and one in Tasmania we'll talk about shortly. But here's an exchange between a councillor and the Mayor of El Paso over this contractual matter for its city manager.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and I think you couldn't be any more wrong about the contract. Now, the contract is what the contract is, of course, and this is not about that.
Did you authorize it? Did you authorize a 5%? Did you authorize a 5%? I saw the floor. Did you authorize a 5% increase?
I did not interrupt you.
Did you authorize a 5% increase on his?
All right, this is not a debate at this point. You need to be professional.
I thought we're in a democracy, sir.
All right, and that's why I have the floor. And you need to be quiet while I have the floor, you understand? Now, I remember why Mayor Margot did not like you, why Mayor Margot disrespected you, because you seem to want to interrupt me, and you seem to have a problem with the prior mayor. You have a problem with me now, and it's got nothing to do with me. Remember,
I haven't
you're
physically
the common
threatened you. You physically threatened me.
You are the common denominator.
You physically threatened me before at this
Now, let me explain to you, sir, that the biggest issue is that we need to have decorum here, and I allowed you to speak, and I will continue to allow you to speak.
Okay, moving on. Steve, we talked last week about the contentious deal to sell the East Paddock at Hanging Rock in Macedon Ranges Shire to the state government to bring that whole precinct under single ownership. There was a rescission motion lodged by one of the councillors there, and that the upshot was unsuccessful, and the sale is now going to proceed.
Presumably, Chris, the rescission was predicated on thinking by one or more councillors that they may be able to persuade one or more of their colleagues, but that didn't happen. And certainly I'm not getting into judgment on this one in particular, but I'll make the point again that there is a lot to be said for public confidence in that decisions of council once made are final, and that really holding to that actually really allows council and the community, once a decision is made, to move on to the phase of implementation.
I did watch the session back, most of it, and it did not appear there was any new information being introduced into the debate. In fact, one of the councillors made that point that nothing had changed since the original decision had been made. Generally, you'd expect there to be some new information or a new argument brought into the fold to consider that rescission. That wasn't the case, and as you say, the original decision stands. And
that point that you've made is a really important one. What's changed?
Yeah. Now, the other news item we've been following, or one of the other news items we've been following, is the industrial action in Moreland. We've talked about this a few times. As of this morning, we understand via a Herald Sun report that the enterprise bargaining agreement has been subject to a vote, which got an 83% approval rate from staff, an 83% yes vote. So that industrial action is now over. I believe all the bins are being collected, and the union that was running a pretty hard line there has been unsuccessful.
Well, and that may well have implications for other EBs as well, Chris. Yeah, interesting.
It may do. We'll keep an eye on that. The banana sculpture in Yarra has been back in the news this week. Did you see this, Steve? An American talk show host, John Oliver from HBO, made I thought it was a flippant offer to buy the banana sculpture for $10, but also make a $10,000 donation to a local food bank. The council's not having any of it.
They've peeled away from any suggestion of accepting the offer, Chris. John Oliver, in fact, I think has a sister that lives in Melbourne and is a regular visitor. And the Last Week Tonight show is almost without exception pretty humorous. So anyway, City of Yarra are attracted to what has become a, I guess, talking point, that banana sculpture.
Yes, I think it might have been the Herald Sun or the Age said that the council said the offer was not appealing, and Mayor Sophie Wade was quoted as saying that the sculpture is still in storage, recuperating after a traumatic decapitation attempt. So that would imply that we could perhaps expect to see it again in the not too distant future.
I'm running short of puns on that one, Chris. I think let's move on.
Let's leave that there before you slip on the banana peel. Now, the South Perth Council is the latest in Western Australia, one of 3 that we're aware of, that is now requiring councillors to declare their affiliations with political parties, Steve.
Interesting one, Chris, because that also, of course, is one of the items for consideration in the Insights report for the Cultural Review. And I've got to say, my jury's kind of out on it a bit. I think there's a real problem. I mean, people say that they don't want politically aligned candidates. If there is dysfunction in a council associated with alignment, that's a problem. But equally, at times, I know historically, the fact that party members have to also conform to the rules of the party around discipline and reputation has been a positive thing. So watch this space, I suppose, Chris.
Absolutely, watch this space and see if any more follow suit on that one. I was just going to comment on the shadow local government minister's comment that he has a fear that councillors would end up being judged on their party affiliation rather than their commitment to their community, which was an interesting take.
Look, that's true too. I always wonder with a lot of these issues, Chris, about what might be an attractive initiative, how people will end up gaming the system. And so is transparency good, or will people just not be members and then not say, but effectively be members anyway? So I never know.
While we're on Western Australia, I just want to point out this story from the WA Today during the week, which is worth a look. It's a real expose on the culture at some Western Australian councils, not just Western Australia, but it also gets into the one that I reported on the roundup on Wednesday about from Kingborough in Tasmania. This one's quite extraordinary, Steve. A councillor here really, I thought, went way too far in his behaviour and his comments. He threatened to tear the place apart and go off his head or something like that after being warned by the deputy mayor who was chairing the meeting to stop interjecting. Let's play a bit of this before we come back and talk about it from Kingborough Council earlier this week.
Well, I'm getting very annoyed with you, and I don't want you interjecting anymore.
Councillor,
I'm warning you right now, under Section 40 of the Local Government Regulations,
yes.
2015, if you keep interjecting, I will eject you from this part of the meeting, okay?
You have
been warned.
You come and take me out. You're most welcome. Come across.
I'm warning you.
Do you know what?
That's what I will do, Councillor Grace,
because I've had enough. You come across and eject me from the meeting, girl. Come out and have a... You come and try and take me. Don't be silly. I'm entitled to debate things on behalf of the council.
You're entitled to a set number of minutes, Councillor. You're entitled to a set number of minutes, Councillor Grace,
yes,
just like every other councillor around this table, and you push the...
But don't you threaten me, Deputy Mayor. Don't threaten me. I've had enough of you lot threatening me. I'll be going off my head here one night and tear this place apart if you keep threatening me like that. My nerves are shattered.
Leave the meeting right now.
I will
Go.
not leave it.
You will leave the meeting. I warned you. Leave.
Go and get the cops and tell.
Is that what I need to do to eject you from the meeting? Right.
I tell you, it was time this council was put out of business. Absolutely. You don't know what you're talking about.
Are you leaving or am I calling the police?
Point of order, Deputy Mayor.
Yes.
Point of order, Deputy Mayor.
Righto.
I think it would be appropriate in the circumstances for you to adjourn the meeting.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Apologies for the previous viewing. That was unprofessional of me, and I thank my colleague, Councillor Street, for proposing that I call an adjournment to the meeting. We have had an adjournment, and Councillor Grace and myself have spoken in the tea room. Councillor Grace, do you have anything to say?
Mayor, Acting Mayor, I just want to apologise, but I'm very passionate, and if I get out of hand, I'm very sorry about that. But I do apologise, and I will sit at the meeting, and we will continue on.
So pretty extraordinary exchange there, Steve, and I've had a few people contact me with some thoughts about this. I'll get your thoughts firstly.
I thought an apology where one apologises for being passionate is basically an excuse to try to, what would you say, pump up your own tyres, when in fact the apology should have been, I'm sorry for being completely inappropriate, for behaving inappropriately and for hurting people and damaging the reputation of the council and the sector. How's that?
Yeah. And most people have said to me, if not all, it wasn't really an apology from him, from Councillor Grace, but also pointing out that the Deputy Mayor apologised for being, I think her word was unprofessional, but most people say, what was she apologising for? And I'd have to agree with that. When you see that piece, she was trying to maintain control of the meeting as chair. I don't think she overstepped her bounds. She might have raised her voice a little bit. I don't think she was the one that needed to apologise for anything, but what I suspect has happened is they've adjourned the meeting for 7 minutes and negotiated a truce of some sort to try and get back to deal with the business and move on. I think that's what's happened, and she's decided to give that apology to keep the peace.
I reckon there's a conversation we could have one day on this show, Chris, about apologies, because I think that, and maybe it's often women, are put in a situation where they feel that they have to apologise, and people doing their job shouldn't have to apologise for doing their job. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting issue.
Of course, we've only seen a 2-minute snapshot. We don't know what happened before. We don't know what happened after. We don't know the rest of the context of that council and other things that are being dealt with. Things that may have come up in that 7-minute conversation. So we're only basing this on the little bit that we saw. But based on that, I don't think she needed to apologise, and I think he should have been ejected from the meeting and censured in some way more strongly.
Couldn't agree more, Chris.
Before we wrap up, this one caught my eye. I think it's a story that you're familiar with from previous times, Steve. A former employee at Frankston City Council, as well as some other organisations, has been in court and has pleaded guilty to gaining financial advantage by deception. This is a pretty extraordinary story.
Well, Mr. Ravenscroft, I believe, managed to secure employment not only at the Frankston City Council, but also at Ombudsman Victoria and Department of Treasury and Finance. And the matter that went to court related to falsification of employment history, which was sort of interesting that the article said that Mr. Ravenscroft had a decorated and quite worthy career in a police force in England that would have stood on its own merits, but he decided to represent himself as being something that he had not been.
Yes, the judge said the lies were probably entirely unnecessary. I mean, he created two fictitious, or at least one fictitious university from which he supposedly had diplomas. I guess my mind went to, it's not that hard to check the bona fides of those sorts of things. These have slipped through the cracks through at least 3 employers' processes.
Yeah, part of me, and this is not the best part of my sort of inner being, Chris, I was quite relieved that it wasn't only local government that was caught out, that this sort of thing can happen anywhere. And it is one of the risks. There are ethical risks with organisations being busy and being under-resourced, that those sort of checks that you talk about don't get done. So it's an important one.
All right, Steve, that's brought me to the end of my list. I know you've got the Better Agreements, Better Teams session coming up next week for VLGA. Do you want to talk about that or any other upcoming events?
Only, Chris, any mayor, anyone aspiring to be a mayor, anyone interested in sort of leadership in regard to this kind of impact of, disputes, good and bad, and how that sort of interrelates with teams, jump onto the VLGA website and come along, because I'm going to have a good chat with Melissa Scadden.
Excellent. A lot of people will be looking forward to that. Thank you, Steve, as always. Lots to talk about this week. I'm sure next week will be no different. Don't forget to subscribe to VLGA Connect on YouTube or on your podcast app. And we must say our thanks to Tony Rannick and the team at Hunt & Hunt Lawyers for sponsoring the program. I think I saw one of their young lawyers picked up an award this week. I'm pretty sure I saw that in my LinkedIn feed, so congratulations are due there.
Absolutely, Chris. And thanks to Hunt & Hunt, and we'll see you next week.